Well, good afternoon. It's wonderful to see you. I hope you're all enjoying the summer despite the heat and the biblical rains, and hopefully we can all cool off here with a little poetry. Before I begin, let's thank the tech team. 15 minutes ago, none of this was here, it wasn't working, nobody knew anything, and boom, yay, tech team. Thank you, Amari. Well, to offer a bit of a frame for today's reading, in the past decade or so, I have written, to my amazement, over 200 poems. Uh, Therefore, it seemed like a good time for me to sort of step back and take stock a little bit of what was happening. Um, so, as you could tell from the title of today's reading, what I'm going to present to you are poems in three categories: those that have won prizes and/or what I consider prize equivalents. I'll explain that later. Those that have been published in books or journals, and finally, those written both recently and also years ago, which I feel have promised to be published one day. So, you can say you heard it here first. Um, as always, I invite you to consider this a two-way street. If you have thoughts or questions or you violently disagree with something, I want to know. So I've learned so much from you already, so please feel free. So let me begin with a poem that won the Harvard Advocate Poetry Prize, written my senior year when I was admitted to the graduate poetry seminar taught by the poet Robert Lowell, who also served as judge of the Advocates contest that year. Mr. Lowell remains, deceased, an amazing poet and was, despite his dark intensity, quite a good teacher. His process was to understand what each of us was aiming for and find a contemporary poet further down the line so that we could be inspired by that and give us some guidance of where we're going. So here's the poem, originally called Against the Plastic, because that's the first line, but I've retitled it Returning. Against the plastic weatherproofing of the window, his profile glows in the ashes of the day. This old young man, questioned by the jungle, returning. The room seems darker. An unshaded bulb streaks the spasmodic quiver of his heavy boot. In the unsteady sky of his memory, fragments swirl like lost clouds. Scenes of houses standing half wrecked, wallpaper stained by long fallen stairs, and doors opening on high emptiness. Music, the drone of strings, an Arab wail, a soft-handed people in a paradise of dreams and pipes, hustling him of his possessions, exchange for lodging, women, keef, and days adrift in chalky blankness, awakening in Italy, not knowing how or from where or when he had come. This old young man, questioned by the jungle, a tiger drowning in the blood that trickles into its lungs, returning. What? Oh, sorry. Let me read that again. Thank you. This old young man, questioned by the jungle, a tiger drowning in the blood that trickles into its lungs, returning. I'll tell Mr. Lowell if I ever meet him again somewhere over there. The second poem is called Mona Lisa. Yeah, that one, Mona Lisa. And it will be published in the North Carolina Barb's Anthology for 2024. There's a wonderful company called Local Gems that has gone around the country in certain states, pulling poets out of the woodwork and then publishing an anthology every year. So this one will be published this year in their anthology. So Mona Lisa, or Mona Lisa. Two women on the couch suspend their internet shopping, laughing about a tweet on making bread with vaginal yeast. Awakened by their laughter, the pup slips away to the embrace of her fluffy bed. By sheer coincidence, the painting of the Mona Lisa appears on my smartphone. For sure, this is not the Louvre, but it's surprisingly detailed in digital miniature. Even the background of blue-gray hills, recently identified by thoughtful geographers, I think in Tuscany somewhere, caused the mind to wander before returning to muse on her puzzling aspects. The right side of her mouth is inexpressively straight, the left side slightly lifted. Her eyes are shifted away. Her awareness is locked on some other presence, you, me, Leonardo, whomever. Her hands fold demurely, one upon the other, but like long legs, the fore and middle fingers of her left hand spread, demurely inviting. The weighted fullness of her breasts belie the youthfulness of skin, as in those days women were several times mothers before their 20th year. The guarded focus of her gaze may mean sadness in love, longing for lost time, the highway blues, perhaps a stifled wound ever to be hidden. Like the desolate blue-gray hills, she remains a creature of solitude, wrapped in the mystery of the eternal feminine. Loneliness, her cup of quiet. But in that moment, does a messenger arrive with tidings that will finally cause a smile? It is a smile, isn't it? Okay, well, I'm not sure they meant to do this, but the anthology publishers sent me another email saying they wanted to use a second poem of mine in the same anthology, which, as I understood it, everybody gets a poem. So I consider that a prize. So this is a second prize-winning poem. We'll see if they meant it. I've sent them an email saying, but we'll see. It's called In the Foreground of Time. The Polaroid lenses deepen the blue, render the clouds tangible, lonely floating atolls on an ever paler ocean as they lose volume and flatten at the horizon. Memories that seemed unforgettable in the foreground of a present time slide off into imprecision. She said, or I think she said, or I thought she. In the room's low light, she looked down at me from her seat on the edge of the bed. Her full white breasts with their small pink nipples hung barely above my lips, her hand stroking my arm. But when I asked with my eyes, tenderly she shook her head. What might have been between us, the motion of giving everything, that promise of forever, hovered like a morning dream, then slipped away. And if I could somehow recall it, somehow find my way back to that atoll, now sharp and slippery from the spines of time's bleached coral, would the memory take hold, or once again fade, like the clouds melting into the horizon of endless oblivion? Some of you may have heard this next poem. This same company that does the local gems, as they call them, on the occasion, why they chose this, I don't know, of the 205th birthday of Walt Whitman, they decided to do a national call for poems in honor of Walt Whitman's 205th birthday. So this poem was chosen to be in that anthology, also published this year. It's called His Favorite Car. My father's favorite car ever was a Ford Fairlane 500. He called it his Hilltopper, surfing the inclines with a smooth purr on holiday trips from the nation's capital to Warm Springs in the low Virginia mountains. Owned by a French couple, the inn where we languidly dined had once been a courthouse. Sleeping quarters were in the converted jailhouse just up the hill. To the amusement of the adults and amazement of us kids, the inmates' carvings on the old wooden cell doors, now leaning against the outside porch, left nothing to the imagination. Dad's only complaint were the serpentine mountainside roads with their unrelenting twists and repetitive turns. One Sunday morning on a quiet drive to town, he simply carved a straight line through the snaking S's of the yellow center stripe until a police cruiser, siren singing, requested we pull over, suspecting inebriation even at that soft Sunday hour. Of course, his wallet with license had been left in vacation indolence on a dresser in the jailhouse. Fortunately, Dad could walk a straight line beside the car, and the dear friends traveled with us spoke the patois needed to soothe those mountain boys in their crisp trooper uniforms. My father, a renowned physician who made years of house calls in snow and bad weather, visiting sick children and distraught parents during the war in his black Studebaker that skidded a bit on icy hills despite its airplane design. Dad, that day, sat quietly in the back seat, swaying with every turn on the drive back to the inn. This next set of poems were published mostly when we were living in the Hudson Valley. We lived in a little town called Beacon, which is just just north of West Point and south of Poughkeepsie. And there's a wonderful full-size magazine called Chronogram, which devoted 2 pages to poetry, unheard of these days. So I was frequently published there, so I will read a couple of poems from Chronogram when I was published. I had lived in New York for just a month shy of 50 years. So suddenly to move to a town of 3,000 people was a shock. And one of the things that most amused me was the names they gave to the streets. Because, there's no Broadway and 42nd Street. There was no, East End Avenue. This poem is called, therefore, Fish and Main. Standing at the corner of Fish and Main, eating ice cream, I can't complain. Sky above the river looks like rain, and that's how it is at Fish and Main. Standing at the corner of Fish and Main, that girl in the truck drives by again. Sure wish I could get her name. Standing at the corner of Fish and Main. Crossing the corner at Fish and Main. Nothing to lose, but nothing to gain. That's what life is, a crazy game on any corner of Fish and Main. Okay, this is a poem about nature, sort of. It's called On Watching a Silverfish Caught in a Bathtub. Legs working frantically, it attempts yet again the smooth porcelain wall of its unexpected prison. To no avail. An instant's purchase will not hold, and it slides back as if it pushed by a cruel hand into the pointless hollow of the endless bottom. Rather like the wedding guest in Coleridge's famous poem, who can't shake the ancient mariner, or rather, since sadder and wider is at least something, but in this case, it's more like depression. The bug knows there is a world beyond, and so desires to join it, yet nothing changes in its numbing entrapment. Clever, it senses that the pitch of the sides is gentler at the corners of the tub, and it bends every effort there, probing with alert antennae, brilliantly sequencing its 24 legs. Imagine having to control 24 limbs. We don't really understand this creature, as it is neither silver nor a fish. Its emotion, however, is transparent. It wants to be free. Pausing, then attempting the impossible over and over. I crush it smartly. Its severed legs still quiver for a moment with the bottom of a shampoo bottle. No one, after all, wants to bathe with a bug. This is a short poem that we all may kind of spark to, called Things. Things hide behind doors, under shelves, between couch pillows, but worst of all, in plain sight. Alas, the brain, when under strain, goes ever so gently down the. Yeah, just this morning, this was the poem. So the next three poems are haikus, which is the Japanese form. Um, it's interesting that actually it was really the haiku was the first three lines of a slightly longer poem form called a tanka. And the thing that makes it fun as a thing in itself is that in Japan, first of all, they're very strict about the number of syllables. In America, sometimes people will call a haiku a 3 or 4 line poem. That's little. But the first line has 5 syllables, second line has 7 syllables, third line has 5 syllables. And something surprising should happen between the second and third line. The tanka adds 2 more longer lines of 7 syllables, but these are just 3 haikus. I don't remember which one they published, but they go together. So, spring haiku. I'll count out the syllables. Like a slow sunrise, greening trees climb the mountains. Old man on a bench. What's funny is that you would think, oh, maybe that works in Japanese, but in English, who knows? But I found in writing them that the stricter I am with myself, like a sonnet, in sticking to the syllable count, the better solutions I come up with. It's really amazing, As Goethe says, there's only law can give us freedom. Only syllables can give us haikus. So. Okay, so I won't count it anymore. Trees, purple blossoms, young women in fine clothing hum, pollinate me. And the third poem is Forsythia dies, dandelions, daffodils now fill soft green lawns. That was a hillside. We lived in a 19th century converted silk mill that had been turned into these long lofts. That was wonderful. And so the way it worked is we were right by the Fishkill Creek, and then there's kind of indentation, a sort of valley, and then the land rose up again. And so as I take my dog Chloe for a walk, there were these wonderful gardens and lawns. So that's what inspired these. Okay, this is the third section. These are the poems that will be published one day. Some of them are new and some of them are quite old. So this first one is called Sacred Secrets. Like the hum of the cosmic microwave background, that's a nod to Psy, the universe's earliest message, the cicada's drone fills the sky, everywhere, equally and from all directions, time delayed by their years spent underground, surviving on tree roots in perpetual darkness. Sounds like an alarm going off, says a neighbor as our 2 pups tangle leashes and sniff the sweet spots. This afternoon, inspired by the spring breeze, tall branches sway and daven, tree to tree, as if passing sacred secrets. In what appears arboreal ecstasy, tall pines lean in to welcome their freshly reliefed neighbor's soft green hands, outstretched to catch the flood of sunlight that also warms my shoulders in this sweet season of Persephone, her lengthening days and pleasant evenings. Sunset glows gold against the gray and salmon clouds. The cicada's drone grows quiet, as if returning west beyond the ancient pillars of Heracles to the dark realm of Hades, where ancient, lost, and pleading souls take form in insect voices, have so startlingly lately been heard almost as recovered memories, among us. These soulful messengers briefly hum prayers from those ancient days and souls. Their soft, translucent wings now lie lifeless on our doorsteps, reminding us to embrace the best of all we know, as our own wings will one day fail like theirs and flutter into loamy quiet and carry us no further. This poem is entitled In Memory of Helen Vendler. Helen Vendler was a critic and professor, quote, widely regarded as the most important American poetry critic of all time. That was from Harvard Magazine. Um, and the poem tells my story about her. So here we go. In memory of Helen Vendler. Alas, she passed just a month ago or so, in April, I guess. The tender blue of the early morning sky showers a mother of pearl gleam on the crepe myrtle's boughs, laden with clusters of astonishing maroon blossoms like pendulous, dew-moistened breasts. Lost to us now, a beautiful soul who showered unique light across the landscape of verse, blazing new paths through vast kingdoms of poetry well trod for centuries. She was a distant friend, rather lately encountered, offering an open hand of terrifying critique and kindness. Despite gaps of place and time that might finally have distanced us, we shared exchanges of delight with poetic language alive on the page, reflecting her awe of how consciousness is shared through verse across centuries, impossibly distant, and yet so humanly near. One morning, my heart pounding from a dazzling literary critique on the centennial of T.S. Eliot's great World War I poem, The Wasteland, I emailed her to be sure she had seen it. Thank you, she answered in tender reply. I wrote it. Well, she still liked me after that. This is a poem I wrote, it turns out 13 years ago. I discovered the other night when I clicked open on a folder I hadn't looked at in a while. In a way, it's kind of my requiem to Manhattan. But anyway, it tells its story too. It's called I Live in a City. I live in a city where hospitals become condos, parking lots become condos, buildings without windows sprout windows and become condos. It's a real estate city. I live in a city where people crazy embrace their lives, their dreams, waiting. Tables line the sidewalks, music thrumming from above, a crowd together in a hum of talk, smoke, and flirt. And all the women are beautiful, mostly. Whether in swinging skirts or satin shorts or flowing fabric complexities, warmed by tableside heaters, talking, laughing, wearing knitted wool caps, one of which says Supremes, or long pigtails, or a leopard spotted scarf. A touch too anxious? Is this cool? Or turning onto the avenue in a shimmery, semi-transparent leopard skin blouse, confident under a bolero jacket. He arrives late by cab from downtown, slides his briefcase under the table, loosening his tie as he kisses her, stealing a French fry from her plate, then downs his first mojito as he lets his day go. I live in a city where style repels off the buildings, which are turning to glass. Life here is all see and be seen, a happening in floor to window, wall to wall transparency. A yellow lab dozes on the couch. Kids play on the rug in a last patch of sunlight. The housekeeper hushes a baby with Caribbean lilt, The television is so big you can watch the game from out here. A tall young woman turns out the kitchen lights, moving to the living room, quiet, unaware, indifferent to being seen. I lived in a city. Well, there's something called Poems for a Day at poetry.org. And if you sign up, you will get a poem every day. Whether you want that poem every day, I can't say, but they do that. But one of the poems that came was an amazing poem that was like a palindrome. It read the same, it went from beginning to end and then end back to the beginning. In absolute, the lines were absolutely the same, just in reverse order, and it meant something. And it was by a young woman who was the poet laureate during COVID, so nobody knows her name or anything. Oh well. But I said, can I do one of those? And so here we go. So again, in honor of Cy Mauskopf, this is a scientific poem, and it talks about how the solar system, or all solar systems, seem to be born. There's a star and there's a cloud of dust around it, and then from that cloud of dust, the planets clump together. And the phrase in Science magazine was, the planets agglomerated dust from the planet forming circumstellar disk around our sun. I just love that stuff. That's really great. Anyway, it's called You Ask, and you'll see when it turns around, and you'll figure out whether it makes sense or not going backwards. It's like someone who knows a parallel park, you know. Creating our cradle, Earth, and the planets of circling gods, star-driven, ultraviolet light swept through a dusty protoplanetary disk. Has our time to know finally come? Awaiting in breathless attendance, we tiny, moist searchers, barely conscious of our own consciousness, hope to see how it all makes sense, hope to learn some fundamental reason. We propose visions of universes beyond our own, peering among the latest discoveries. We trust that time will tell, but has time ever spoken? Then you rightly ask, what is time? Oh, that most vexing of questions. Oh, that most vexing of questions. You rightly ask, what is time? Has time ever spoken? We trust that time will tell. Peering among the latest discoveries, we propose visions of universes beyond our own, hoping to learn some fundamental reason, hoping to see how it all makes sense. Barely conscious of our consciousness, we tiny, moist searchers, circling in breathless attendance, we wonder, has our time to know finally come? Through a dusty, planet-forming circumstellar disk, star-driven ultraviolet light swept across the heavenly planets of circling gods, rocking our cradle, Earth. Worked? Okay. So before I read you the last poem, I just want to thank you all for being here. It's just so wonderful. You have no idea. It's just the best. So this poem is called Lady Shikibu. And there was in the 10th century, in the Heian dynasty in Japan, there was a courtesan named Murasaki Shikibu. And she is believed to have written the first novel in the history of human civilization. It's called The Tale of Genji, and it's absolutely gorgeous. It's about this prince in that era of Japan and his love affairs and it's kind of almost Jungian. He falls from grace and then he returns again. But just to be there, I mean, to read that book, you know, Emily Dickinson has that phrase, there is no frigate like a book to take you lands away. Well, if you want to go to 10th century Japan, this book will do it for you. It's great. So again, thank you. And Lady Shikibu. Oh, the other thing I need to say is that After the lovers had finished their tryst, instead of smoking cigarettes, they wrote each other poems. So, Lady Shikibu. In the earliest dawn, little birds awaken, like memories on my lips of your last kiss. Thank you very much. So if you have any questions or anything, or not, it's fine. Was it? Oh, fantastic. It was amazing. Yeah. YouTube knows everything. It's amazing. What? Or password? Oh, yeah, of course. Right. The PBS streaming site. No, that's terrific. No. What? Genji. The Tale of Genji, the Shining Prince, as you can imagine. And there was another courtesan, and they were kind of dueling courtesans in terms of their poetry. I don't know about the other stuff, but I forget what her name is, but she wrote a lot of good poems. And there's some thought that maybe the Tale of Genji was not completely finished by Murasaki, that because there seems to be a change in tone and language. But Mozart didn't finish the Requiem, and yet we love him anyway. So Murasaki. Thank you very much, guys. It's a pleasure to be with you. Oh, I didn't tell you, by the way, because it was on the back of the sheet. I forgot to say I was so surprised by when Robert Lowell judged my poem to be the winner at the Harvard Advocate. I mean, it was like, where did that come from? Because he and I didn't always agree on the way I approach poetry, and I thought, oh dear, okay, well, whatever, But it won. Fight fiercely, Harvard. Demonstrate to them our skills, albeit they. Yes, that's wonderful. Oh, you're so welcome. It's so great to see you.